Hey all. So in this one, I just noticed a couple little bugs while going through the code. So I wanted to kind of take a step back in this tutorial and just go through a couple of them. So the first one that I noticed here is you can actually manipulate these values in the header here to not be what's in the list. So if we just put like a Z at the end of this, see, we just get this like ugly traceback here, which we don't really want that. The second thing I noticed too is you can set these both to be the same value, which is something that we didn't want to have happen. And the last one here is it's kind of a trickier one to come up. So if we set this back to height. Okay. So we're back to when you would initially load it. If we start switching these back and forth really fast, like if we do Helen, you see it got set back to weight very quickly. So that's another one. That's a trickier one that we kind of want to get out of the way with something called session state. So let's get into it. Alright, so back in the code here, the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to wrap this all in a try-catch statement, but just with a little nuance. So we're going to want to do this after all the imports, and at least after the Streamlit imports, because the reason being we're going to want to display something on the screen if there's an error. And we'll use Streamlit to do that. So what we'll do is we'll just do try and then scroll basically all the way to the bottom. And then just match that with, is it this tab or this tab? It is... Okay, one tab in and one tab in. Yeah, it can get confusing sometimes with your tabs. So we'll just catch the exception. And what we'll do is we'll use a Streamlit message here, and we'll just say streamlit.error. An error has occurred. Please contact the admin. Contract to admin, whatever. That's fine for now. No, we'll get rid of it. Being too nonchalant before, and then what we do is we still want the actual traceback here. So what we're going to do is rather than just print the exception, we want all the information that we can get, right? So in Python, there's a way to get the actual traceback, and that is actually from a library. So if we scroll back up here to the top and do import traceback, and then scroll all the way to the bottom. So this recognized now, great. So format exe. This is the one that we want. Okay. So if we save that and then go back to our thing here, and let's do the one where it's weight and weight. See, it says an error has occurred. Please contact admin. And it just stops rendering right there. So that doesn't put in the ugly traceback, but the advantage with printing the traceback is we now have it right here. So we know like on exactly which line that fails. It helps with debugging, as well as gives the user a little bit of better experience. Okay, so let's first focus on the trickiest error here. So the one where we go really fast, and then it doesn't end up updating the select boxes fast enough. So what's happening here is this is just a Python application, right? So it just renders top to bottom. So there's still a lag time between the select box making a choice on that and then actually setting the URL parameters here. So this is not actually the most proper way of doing this, and this I actually just found out myself too, so we're learning together here. So instead, what we're going to do is every select box and most widgets, honestly, have something called an onChange attribute, and this is more the proper way to handle these use cases. So when something ends up changing in the box, this is what we'll do. We'll do st dot query params. Not sure why it's not popping up, but this is what it is. And then update. And so query params we went over last time is just a running dictionary, right? So that's why we can use the update method for that. So what we want to do is we introduced the x-axis on the query param last time. You can see that here, right? So we want to update the x-axis key, and instead we can't do the actual value of the x-axis because this is the x-axis. This is what we're performing the select box on. So what we'll use is we'll use something called session state. So how this works, just very briefly, is every widget that you assign a key to is, well, every widget in general, but when you assign a key, you control the actual name of the session state object. It's the value of this select box will be stored in that session state. So we can take advantage of that. We can set the x-axis equal to Streamlit dot session state, and then just dot x-axis, right? Because this is what the key is called. So then we can get rid of this guy right here. And one more thing to note too is the value of this onChange has to be an actual function because it's meant to be a callback function. So we can't just say this right here. What we use is, and I'm not sure if we've gone over this in a previous video, but we use a lambda, and what this basically is it just basically makes like a one-line function. That's kind of how it's being applied right here. Okay, so what we did with the x-axis up here, well, you guessed it, just want to do that same thing with the y-axis. So we'll just copy and paste the lambda and just replace these to say y-axis. And then remember, we can get rid of this set URL param right here. Oops, went too far. Okay, save that. And then also in helpers, where we have set URL param, we can just get rid of that since this function is no longer being used. Okay, so now back on the actual app here, it's kind of hard to replicate, but let's see what we can do. So let's set this to wait. Let's set this to Fran. Set this to Helen. Then let's also set this to wait. Set that to Fran. Okay, so that part looks like it's working correctly. Alright, let's take a slight detour because I just noticed all of these prints showing up, and I don't remember where exactly I put that. So what I'm going to do is, it's definitely something I printed out. So just search for print and then, okay, main.py. Let's get rid of that. That's annoying. Alright, save that. Alright, now back to our regularly scheduled programming. So, for the no nonsense values bug, here's what we're going to do is we'll say if the X selection, so whatever is in the query parameters, if it's not in the numeric columns, that's so weird that word doesn't have a B in it, since number does, but numeric does. That always screws me up. If that's the case, we're going to say X selection is equal to, and then we can just say, see, it did it again. Numeric columns and then the first index. And then also we want to update the query parameters here. See, now it shows up on my IntelliSense. Better late than never, I suppose. So we'll update the x-axis with the X selection. Perfect. Okay, and now one more thing I'm noticing is we're referencing the first index twice, so let's just see. It might be nice to have like an X default, and the same thing with the Y default. So we'll just say so that if we choose something different in the future, like we want another default, we just have to edit it at one place. Just makes it a little bit nicer. So we'll do the same thing for the Y default. Equals numeric columns. And this will be the second value, so the first index. That's confusing too. Okay. And then for these guys, just say X default, and then X default up here, and then Y default. So for the Y selection here, what we can do is we can copy and paste this, of course. Now we could put it here to solve this nonsense bug we're looking at, but remember our logic here to make sure that the Y values are not the same. And so we can kind of kill two birds with one stone here. And we can do all of the Y selection down here. So we'll just say Y selection, Y default, Y axis here, and Y selection. Okay, so taking a look at our app, if we set this to height Z, then it just resets to height right here. If we do Helen, let's do Helen Z, it resets to H because that was the default. Okay, now the last thing, if we set this to age and age, then we still run into an error, so let's solve that. Okay, so back in the code here, this should actually, instead of Y selection not in numeric columns, it should be not in Y values, because that's the Y values after we've already settled that. So all we want to do is then if Y selection equal to the X selection, or so what I'm thinking is we set Y default up here, but we should really set Y default down here after we've already done the logic with this list. So then we can say Y values 0. And that leaves the problem of Y selection is Y default is not going to be defined, but it doesn't look like we need Y up here, so we can just do after we define the default here. So let's save that. Alright, so now if we go back to the app, alright, so this age and height, if we set it in the URL params, be age and age, this just goes back to age and height, and then same on the x-axis too. It goes to height and age. So I think that solves it. And just to double check, if we set this to age Z, then that error doesn't show up. Just wanted to make sure I didn't reintroduce it. Alright, so that seems to be everything. So thank you for watching.